about this notion of party as platform, where you have an interlocking set of values or rules, or to simplify the complexities of the decisions that have to come before Congress? What is your thought about that idea? I mean, obviously, on one side, it's parties have changed their platforms, almost reversed them over time, so it's hard to say they're consistent. But on the other side, a lot of scholars seem to suggest that this interlocking set of this platform idea is important in order to organize and to make decision making possible. It sounds like you'd rather have the chaos of individual bills going up through Congress rather than some organizing principle around it.
Why is that chaos? When you have a board meeting, is it chaos? We don't. Why would it be chaos to have bills come up and people are allowed to speak pro or con, and at the end of the process you have a vote on it? There's nothing changed except you're not letting party policy decide what it should be. So a menu. So I've been doing research into the early Congresses, and it's very interesting. So you take they had parties, they had parties, but here's what it meant. You may be for a strong central government. I may be for a less strong central government on issues that regard how much power you're going to give in the central government. You and I are going to not vote alike. The next issue may be whether or not you should give foreign aid to Zambia. We may agree on that one. And the next issue may be, how do we feel about tariffs? We may disagree on that, or we may agree on that. And if you go through the early Congresses, when you did not have this party structure, people would vote all sorts of, they made, so let me put it this way, Matt, if I had been, you lived in Oklahoma City and I was running there, how would you react if I said to you, Matt, you have looked at me, you've listened to me, you have decided how smart you think I am or how dumb you think I am, whether or not I understand the issues you care about, whether I can articulate a point of view, all this stuff. And I said, okay, you have judged me. And I promise you that if you vote for me, I will go to Washington and do whatever my leader tells me to do. Would you vote for me? I'm from Oklahoma. If I were a Democrat, I'm from Oklahoma. You size me up, I'm going to go do whatever Chuck Schumer says I should do. Really? But we've got to need
then when you do your early Congress work, I'm very interested to hear this, because a lot of scholars focus on the last 150 or so years, and they don't go earlier in terms of the dynamic between parties and what it meant. What was the structure then around this minority majority leader? Were there such things? When did that notion pop up? Was it?
I don't know. I can't tell you the year, but I can tell you that. And then there were speakers, but the speaker was elected by the members, not by party A or party B. The speaker was elected by the members. So they had parties. So the way I describe it is there's a difference between party and faction. James Madison said, in order to be able to keep any one faction from dominating the country, you need to empower multiple factions. And so that's what we have. We had multiple factions. We didn't have one agenda. So these were shifting factions. We were together on some of the people there were pro-British, some were pro-French, some were pro-westward expansion, some were not, but they shifted. People didn't have a lockstep menu. That sounds to me like China. Here's the lockstep menu. You will sign on to our dictate, or you will sign on to their dictate. And how there was a guy named E.E. Schachtschneider, who he was a political scientist many years ago, who said that you have to have political parties for a democracy. It's nonsense. Political parties are destructive of democracy. They take away the power of the people and put it into small power-seeking groups who can control who can be on the ballot, what your district is like, what bills can be considered. It's the most undemocratic system you can find.
Coming from a man who used to be deep into the party system himself.
Right. I was a party leader.
So
But what happened was I got invited to go teach. And the secret about teaching, Matt, as you probably know, is that when you're in the classroom, you're really on. But when you're not in the classroom and you have another 5 days before your next class or 3 days, you have time to think and reflect and say, whoa, what worked? What didn't? What was wrong? Makes a big difference.
So before we move on to kind of our more lightning round type of questions, I do want to just touch on the concept of money shortly, because I think you have some strong opinions in that area. Could you share those with us as it relates to Congress?
Well, I think it's complicated. I think transparency is important, even though I could make an argument against transparency. I could say that there's an intimidation factor there, as the courts have consistently ruled. You, Matt, as a businessman, have a right to try to influence the outcomes of government and what your legislators do. We're supposed to protect the people from government, not protect the government from the people. And you ought to be able to try to influence the outcome. All of us ought to be able to. So that's legitimate. Where it gets out of line is when you remove the limits, and therefore somebody who is very successful and can spend huge amounts of money, because they can't make huge amounts of direct contributions, but other ways, and affect the outcome much more than other citizens can. That's where it becomes unfair. And so there need to be rules in place on contributions that don't allow some groups or corporations, for example. The whole idea that a corporation is a person, which is what the court said, is just utter nonsense. I mean, it's just one of the dumbest decisions they've ever made. So I would ban corporate contributions. When I was running for Congress a long time ago, corporations could not give a penny. They couldn't even give you a chair for your office. Labor unions could not give you a penny. It all had to come from individuals or political action committees, but a political action committee couldn't give more than $5,000. An individual couldn't give more than $1,000 as per election cycle. And when it all opened up, then it became a free-for-all. And we need to get back to the systems that we used to have that allowed people to speak up and be heard, and you could put your $1,000 in or whatever, but not allow you to have a disproportionate voice in who got elected.
All right. Well, let's move on to the questions that I ask all our guests, so that later on we can compare answers.
All right.
If you're ready for that, we'll move on. Of course, the first question here is one that you've talked on extensively, so this one should be one that you've already given a lot of thought to, which is, what do you think congressional representation should mean?
I'm a Burkean. Edmund Burke told his constituents in Bristol that it was his job to listen to them, to hear them, but not necessarily to do what they said, because they are less informed about the issues. They're swept up by the passion of the moment. I think your job is to be not just a representative, but also a United States member, a United States congressman. Not just the delegate from that constituency, but somebody who's been elected to give the best judgment to every issue that he or she can do. And so
covers the judgment versus reflecting the beliefs idea. So I think you've covered that one. Now, what about in terms of the people that he represents in that district? Is it the voters? Is it all the people? Is it which people is it that he's representing?
I represented a district, as I mentioned earlier before we got on the air. I represented a district that was heavily Democratic. I'm a Republican. I was a Republican, I'm not anymore. Uh, but I was elected to be the congressman from the 5th district. I was not elected to be the congressman for the Republicans of the 5th district. Um, Once I went to Washington and I took the oath of office, my loyalty was to the Constitution, to the country. You know, it was, and in my constituency, I was supposed to represent the interests of the people in my constituency, whether they voted for me or against me.
So what about the future? So this is a question I like to ask, and it relates to future voters of the district. So clearly, one challenge is that the government can create liabilities in the future to future voters.
Right.
But meanwhile, the people voting for the representative are alive today. So when you conceive of this representation of everyone in the district, does it include the future of the district, or is it just the current living members of the district?
Well, that's where being a Burkean comes in, and that is you are supposed to be using your judgment as to what is the best thing. It's not to satisfying the hunger of the moment. You do have to be aware of that. If there are problems with poverty, if there are problems with crime, if there are problems with housing, I mean, you have to address those. But you also have to be thinking about the long-term welfare of the country, and that includes your district. And so I spent a lot of time on economic development for my district. I worked hard to get people, to get a company that might be thinking about setting up a plant in Ohio or California. I worked really hard to get them to come to Oklahoma instead. So it's long term as well. It's just like in business. Are you worried about what you have to do today, or are you worried about where you're going to be in 5 years? It's the same. You have to do both.
Great. So the next question is more a practical one about time. How should Congress allocate its time, whether it's in committee versus oversight versus legislation versus home district constituency?
Well, let me first address the real misconception is the media, which has some guilt in some of what goes on, tends to look at the time that you're away from Washington as not working. Or in this last election in Massachusetts, where Senator Ed Markey was running for re-election to the Senate, he was attacked for not spending more time in his district. I mean, you can't win. You have an obligation to spend what time you can with your constituents, meeting with them, listening to them. I would on weekends have 4 or 5 town meetings a day with my constituents. Spent a lot of time, had a lot of staff in the district to listen to my constituents. But I do think that should be weekends or long weekends when there's a holiday. I think outside of that, the 3 days working in Washington is absurd. There's too many big issues. You should be spending 5 days in Washington and then have a break, a 2-week break from time to time where you can be with your constituents. But not enough time is spent actually in Washington doing the business. A lot of it needs to be in the committees. That's where you really dig in, especially if you get rid of the party control, where you really dig into the pros and cons of an issue and see if you can resolve it and amend it and come up with a workable solution. That's important. But you also, by staying more time in Washington, you get to know each other. So if Matt, if you were in Congress and I was, and you're a Democrat, I'm a Republican, let's just say, or vice versa, whatever you want. I probably don't know you. I mean, there's 435 of us. All I know about you is whether you have a D or an R on your forehead. And so I like you or don't because you're part of the enemy or you're part of my team. If you actually had more time in Washington, at least the 5-day weeks, and opportunities for people to travel together, which gets frowned on by the media, to travel to get to know each other it would make it a lot easier to find cooperation, collegiality, compromise, all of those things. And part of the problem we have now in Congress is that people don't really get to know each other as human beings. They're just the enemy or the friend, and that's a problem.
So it sounds like you'd have them spend more time in DC 5 days a week for a few weeks stretch, and then go home for a week or whatever. Something
Yes.
the 2 on, 1 off or whatever. They've got a few different type of such proposals, and then some of that time would be spent. Most of that time would be spent in committee, face to face, and developing relationships with each other. What about the split between kind of legislation and oversight types of activities? Do you have a notion of that? Is it the same thing in your mind, or are those two different?
Because that's walking and chewing gum at the same time. They're different committees. So whatever committee you're on may have an oversight subcommittee. So it's doing the oversight business while you're doing something else. So it's division of labor, and which is what makes it work. So there's no reason why you have to choose between legislating and oversight. Both of them can go on at the same time.
Great. So I think my next question sort of follows up on where you were getting with the relationships question in a way, which is how should the nature of debate, deliberation, or dialogue happen in Congress? How should this happen? Should this discussion, this kind of dialogue happen in committee? Should it happen on the floor? What should happen behind closed doors? Should be transparent. Should there be some privacy injected into this conversation so people can develop relationships? What's your prescription for making good discussion, good dialogue, good debate?
Well, it's all of the above. For one thing, you do have to allow opportunities for members to sit down together and be candid with each other and put it all on the table and come to agreement. As long as everything is out in the spotlight, then the left is going to be keeping close tabs on every Democrat, and the right's going to be keeping close tabs on every Republican, and you're fearful of saying something that looks like you're willing to compromise. So there has to be space for some things to not be out in the public eye. Just like when you're working out something with your spouse, you got to get behind closed doors and do it just to solve the problem. I think that you need to have adequate time to have a chance to get away, to spend, having dinner together, where these conversations can unfold naturally, and you build trust with each other. I think that's important. I think that in a committee system, well, first of all, when you're on the House floor, you can't do away with the time on the House floor, because otherwise it's only the members of that particular committee who get to make the decision. When you get on the House floor, all 435 have a right. So here is one final answer I will give to that. When I was first elected, Tip O'Neill was the speaker. We had rousing debates, many rousing debates, and they went on and they were wonderful. It was democracy at its best. When Tip retired, a guy named Jim Wright from Texas became the next speaker. And Jim Wright saying, oh my God, Reagan is so popular. I mean, he even carried Massachusetts twice. He was so popular that members of my Democratic Party are going to be afraid to vote against what he does. Therefore, what we have to do is not let his ideas come to the floor, not let them come up. And so he started instituting closed rules that said the Rules Committee would say, you can only offer these two amendments and no other, that we have to pre-approve, or we won't allow any amendments on the bill. And so completely shut off free debate. And that's been often used in the years since. So the answer to that is you have to have open rules, or at least rules open enough. I'm talking about the House now, not the Senate. Rules open enough that people who have a different point of view, who want to make an argument for a change or against something, have a right to be heard. Because every one of them, every single one of those people is representing more than 500,000 Americans, and getting rid of closed rules, or at least um, in decreasing the number of closed rules, would be a big step forward. Your debate has to be free, open, and accessible.
So it sounds like you're a mix of sort of public discussion in committee along with private time in committee,
Right,
and then a more open rules process on the floor.
right. So I would say, and I think a lot of people would agree, that one of the worst things that ever happened to Congress was Newt Gingrich's election as Speaker. Newt uh, actually turned everything into a constant war. But what motivated Newt and got him elected to be the new Republican leader when he did was reaction against all those closed rules that were shutting Republicans out of the discussion. That gave the fuel for him to take advantage of it and get elected. So you could say that Newt was the worst one, but if he was the worst one, Jim Wright was the worst one before that because he created the circumstances that allowed Newt Gingrich to become the leader.
Next question is looking out, say 50 years, what fundamental institutional improvement do you want Congress to make?
Well, I start with obviously removing the ability of the parties to keep things off the floor or to force things through the floor. I don't object to the filibuster. I think the filibuster is a good idea, but it needs to go back to what it used to be with one change. One is, so first of all, you'd have to go back to the system. You actually had to occupy the floor, and you couldn't, I would change it so you could not read your grandma's recipes. You had to talk about the issue and make the case. And the other is have a
germaneness.
Yeah.
Rule on the filibuster.
It would have to be germane, but you'd also, instead of having, at some point you need 60 votes or 66, whatever, to cut it off, I would have a sliding scale. I would say for the first week, okay, requires 60 or 66, whatever you want, so that the American people and your colleagues get to actually hear and listen to the case about why you're wrong. And then the next week, cut it down to 55 votes, we'll shut it off. And the week after that, 50 votes or 51 votes, and it's done. So allow time. The purpose of the filibuster is to allow time to prevent somebody from rushing something through and to allow the debate to be fully joined. After that, there ought to be a way to end it after enough time. Okay, we've all heard it. We know your point. We can weigh it and evaluate it, and now we're going to decide.
Excellent. So next question is, your plans. So what do you have in the works, and what are your plans in the coming years?
Well, I'm working on another book, and this is the book about why and how. You kept coming back with how. Why and how to decouple parties, which I support and want to exist and have them thrive, how to decouple them from being able to control the governing system and the election systems. So that's basically my book. And to do that, to go back to what you're basically being driven by, you have to start by saying, well, what is the purpose of government? What is the purpose of elections? What is the purpose of legislatures? And I'm going through in my book and pointing out how the party system undermines the achieving of those purposes. And so that's kind of where I'm going.
And you'll continue to teach and be at the academic world or back to DC or what?
Well, I'm not 30 anymore. And so I'm going to teach as long as they'll let me teach. And I'm going to write. I'm not going to go back to Washington. I'm not going to go back to, I want to spend the rest of my years basically writing, speaking, teaching as long as they'll let me do that. So, I mean, I signed on at Princeton this time for, it's kind of like Harvard. I signed on, for 3 semesters, and they've now asked me 3 different times to stay longer. And at some point I will do that, but, I want to take care of my wife. I want to, we want to take some trips. We want to see what there is besides work. So, we're going to do that too. But I intend to keep writing and speaking as long as I can.
Representative Edwards, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and really appreciate all the work that you've done and continue to do.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.